Hello and welcome to today's Podcast Plus, where we bring you insight for best practice in bite-sized chunks. Today's hot topic really is a hot topic. It's essentials for home working, and this applies to all organisations. We recently also provided a Podcast Plus on essentials for video conferencing, and there is some overlap between the two, but it's well worth taking the time, if you can, to look at the other one as well. What we're going to cover today are some of the questions that we've been receiving from other professionals and other people who are home working at the moment, and provide, if you like, experienced and insightful responses. I'm joined today, I'm Neil Partridge, by the way, Operations Director at PDA Legal, and I'm joined today by Samantha Aldridge, who is the Director at P&P Hub. I'm just going to hand over to Samantha now to take us through what it is we're going to try and cover today.
Perfect, thank you, Neil. So on the next screen, there's a list of items that hopefully we're going to cover. And as you've already said, it does overlap with our podcast on essentials of video conferencing, but it is important to reinforce data protection principles, and we will be discussing them in slightly different contexts in both of these podcasts, so well worth listening to both of them. So I think the first question really is, when we are remote working, we should consider both practical issues and regulatory considerations. And I think that most people, when they think of confidentiality and data protection, when working from home, they immediately think of their computers and screen visibility with others in the household, things like that. But there are considerations for what people are printing, what they're writing down, and what they're doing with those.
Definitely. In fact, this particular question was put to us very recently by a manager who realised that he had a member of staff who was writing things down in a folder, business information, including personal data, but just business information, and leaving it on their desk or their study when they'd finished working. And the study was also used as the kids' playroom at the weekend. So, in other words, lots of people had eyes on this commercial information. Yes, of course, we're working on computers. When you switch a computer off, in theory, that information vanishes from sight. But what you do with anything you've written down afterwards, post-it notes, notepads and folders, they're going to remain out. So I suggested to that manager, and I'd say the same to anybody now, when you've finished working on paper, because paper is just as important, maybe have some rules or have some guidance as to where you want staff to put that. And please, please, please do not leave post-it notes with login details for your remote logins on the side of the computer. Just because you're at home does not make that information any more or less safe than if you put a post-it note out on your office desk.
Yes, or I think, putting stuff in the regular household bin, you wouldn't do that in the office. You put it in a confidential waste bin, things like that. And the next question, I think, was about USBs and portable devices, and whether these, how should they be approached when working remotely?
That's a really good one. Most of us have a very effective office network where we can transfer data and information. That gets a little bit more complex when we work from home. Now, it's worth noting that email, as we know, is one of the worst risks for transmission of viruses and bugs and things you shouldn't be bringing into your system. USBs are, in some cases, worse, and in some cases, at least the second worst. So essentially what we would normally say in an office environment is don't use USB sticks ever. And we would say the same at home. If you absolutely have to use a USB, and I work with a number of legal practices who have to transfer huge amounts of data between a barrister or an expert and the law firm. And sometimes the barrister or the expert will provide a DVD, or they'll provide a USB with this information on it. And what they do within the office is they take the USB, and in the solicitor's office they are able to plug it into a computer that's isolated from the rest of the network, and they can check what's on there and vet it and make sure that it's safe. Most people in their own homes don't have that kind of resource. So the bottom line is don't use USBs for anything. It really isn't safe. You're better off transferring things through the cloud or similar if you can. If in doubt, bottom line, don't use it.
I know that many firms will be in a position to be able to ask staff not to use firm devices for personal use. But on the other side, many firms may be allowing their staff to use personal devices during the lockdown. Why might this be an issue?
Well, this is a question I've been asked all the time. I get asked about this by a lot of organisations, law firms and other companies. First of all, is it okay for staff to use their own devices to conduct work? And the answer is actually no, not really. Because there are data protection and investigating data breaches and that sort of thing becomes much, much harder if you've got to pry into privately owned devices. But bear in mind that your work your network, what you do for your clients. It's affected by every single device that integrates with it. So, for instance, you could have at work or as a manager, you could have the latest Windows 10 software, the latest virus checking software, and so forth on your machine. And don't forget mobile phones. I've got an iPhone, as has half the population who have smartphones, and I make sure that my updates are done on time. But if your updates aren't done on time, and I've conducted security audits for law firms, for instance, and others, where their staff haven't updated the devices and they're running on a really old operating system. And I make the joke, but it's not really a joke, that they might as well, if they're out of date, unlock the phone and leave it on the seat of a bus, because that's how secure it is. So it isn't really okay for staff to use their own devices. Anything that connects to your network should be owned by the business. And I would say wherever possible, really, really avoid it. The other thing is, bearing in mind if people are using their own devices, who else is using that device? If someone's using their own computer, perhaps their partner might use it to do some shopping later on. Perhaps they might allow their kids to watch TV through it or to do some homework on it or something like that. And whenever you use a device, even if you've logged off, there are still some temporary files on that device. Temporary internet files, for instance. So another user can log on but still see some of the work that you've done. Bottom line, you really shouldn't be using your own device, and that includes mobile devices, to conduct work for a business.
I understand what you're saying, Neil, about that and the risks involved, but what if people do not have any choice other than to allow staff to use their own devices?
Okay, and this is going to be inevitable, I suspect. A lot of us were sent home a few weeks ago with virtually no notice at all, without any opportunity to think about the technology we're going to be using. So if it is inevitable, I think there's one golden rule, and that's you must know what devices people are using, and you really must know what software they're using. And that's right down to the virus checker and right down to the version of the operating systems. The reason I say that is if people are using Windows 7, it is not secure. Windows 7 didn't cause the WannaCry attack on the NHS 3 years ago. In fact, 3 years ago, to the month almost. But Windows 7 had a patch which was available from Microsoft. Many people didn't apply the patch, and that's why the WannaCry bug got into the IT systems of the NHS, nearly crippled the NHS. And I'd actually mention at this point that a lot of those NHS trusts had ISO 27001, very good standard, but they had that, and most of those, if not all of those, had Cyber Essentials, and it didn't do them any good at all. Windows 7, all the security support stopped from Microsoft in January 2020, which means any device running Windows 7 is a risk to your business. Even if your staff are using Windows 7 at home and you're using Windows 10 and they're emailing you, the fact that they're emailing you from a Windows 7 machine is introducing that risk back onto your system. So, number one rule, if you have no choice, I would say you're better off staff not doing work at all than asking them to work on Windows 7. So know what they've got. Don't also be lured into a false sense of security by thinking you're logging into a secure portal. Bottom line is, yes, you may have a secure portal that your staff can log into, but they're still logging into that portal from a Windows 7 machine. So, number one, what you need to do is make sure that all of your staff are using their own devices. PCs, Macs and mobile devices have the most up-to-date software. Easy way of doing that is to ask them to do a screen grab of their screens, their software screens, because you can get that information from your phone by doing a screen grab on your phone or on your PC and just emailing it to you and saying, this is proof we've got the latest software. The reason you might need that is because breaches are going to happen. The way we're working, it's very few people were completely geared up for this. There will be breaches, and these are going to emerge in the next few months. The Information Commissioner, the ICO, has not said, don't worry guys, we'll let you off because of coronavirus. They definitely won't. But if something goes wrong, if there is a breach, and if you can at least say, well, we've got evidence that we asked our staff to provide us with screen grabs to show that we're using the latest software, at least that's a layer of armour you can present to say we tried to do what we needed to do. If staff have got no choice but to use their own devices, make absolutely sure that nobody else uses or sees that device until after the member of staff has logged off, and make sure that the member of staff has also deleted the temporary internet files, because they can be retained between users sometimes.
Neil, what are the risks involved with home Wi-Fi networks? What should people be thinking about?
We're all involved in the Internet of Things, aren't we? So we have internet TVs, we have family members or kids on iPads while we're trying to do some work. Here's a little interesting story. With the permission of the business owner, a colleague and I went into their reception area and we were given access, with the business owner's permission, we were given access to their Wi-Fi, their guest Wi-Fi network. This particular business, what they had was they had a staff Wi-Fi network, which is what they used to on their work laptops to do work for the business. But they also had, very nicely, they had a guest Wi-Fi network, which they had for people sitting in the reception area. What the business didn't realise is, although you've got two separate passwords, they eventually finish up on the same network. So my colleague, within 3 minutes, having been given the Wi-Fi password, we had actually gone into the main business network and we'd shut down all the business's printers. Now, if we can shut down the business's printers, what else can we do? Some more horrible stories. We've heard recently of paedophiles talking to children through baby monitors, where the baby monitor hasn't been set up properly, but it's on your Wi-Fi network. We've also heard about the Internet of Things and Siri and Alexa listening in on things. Your system is only as robust as the weakest link. And if it's all on the same network, all devices are affected. Yes, have a VPN or something like that, because without a VPN, you can be tracked by outside sources. You might not be able to switch off your smart TV if the kids are watching it or somebody else is watching it. You might not be able to stop people from using their iPads. People can't just sit there and do nothing all day while you're working. But the best thing I would suggest is try to avoid anybody actually using another laptop or another computer which is using the internet at the same time as you. So minimise that risk. And try to use as few internet connected devices as possible whilst you're working from home.
So during remote working, staff may be using additional applications to stay connected. What's your views on applications like Skype, Zoom, Dropbox, WhatsApp, all of those kind of things?
I get asked about this a lot as well, and in fact Zoom has been making big news in the press. Zoom is 2 million people are using it every day. I mean, it's a phenomenal number of uses. I'm not saying it's a bad desktop application, but it has its problems. For instance, it lacks end-to-end encryption. So if you're sharing a document, that document may not be secure. It's what I call the lemming effect, actually. Just because 2 million people do something doesn't make it right. The other aspect, and I read on in the Telegraph, and I saw it in the Daily Mail, looking at the papers recently, that several flaws have been exposed with Zoom. The same goes for using things like WhatsApp. Let's not forget that WhatsApp is actually part of the Facebook group of companies, and the Facebook group of companies and the WhatsApp conduit is controlled in the United States. Now, I'm not aware of any terrible flaws going on there, but at the end of the day, even if you are WhatsApp conferencing somebody in the next town in the UK, the conduit that's maintaining it is still US based. Have a think about that. The other aspect is things like document vaults and Dropbox. Now, I've got a Dropbox account, a professional Dropbox account that I use for my own stuff. I don't use it for client work. Now, let's just stay with Dropbox for a moment. The professional version of Dropbox, I pay $100 a year for that. There is small print there that says it will comply with the GDPR or its equivalent. If you're working with staff who are working remotely and don't have their own professional Dropbox account or similar, and they've maybe got the free Dropbox account because you need a Dropbox account to exchange documents. If they're using the free version, that is not necessarily GDPR compliant. Check the licensing. When I do client work, people ask me all the time, well, Neil, if you don't use Dropbox, what do you use? When I'm working with clients, I use the Safe4 document transfer system. But I'd say with all these things, identify what your staff are using. It's a very, very good idea for managers to set the rules and say, guys, these are the applications you can use to conference and to communicate. Do not use anything else. Make sure they're the right ones. I'd also say, very importantly, when you're going to do internet conferencing, make sure you delete the temporary internet files afterwards, because those can be retained on the system. Also, make sure that you've recorded what software you're allowing your staff to use, and set that as a rule and say, guys, you must use this software and nothing else. It just makes things a little bit more controllable.
So the BBC have reported that people are maybe taking advantage of businesses having to work from home. For example, email phishing attacks are on the rise. So what can firms do?
Email attacks are on the rise. In fact, I remember I did a LinkedIn post on this almost a month ago, almost immediately after lockdown, and I published it on there. And I think the introductory text I put on the post was, "And so it begins." And in actual fact, we've heard reports recently of the NHS being attacked by email or using email as a conduit. So, I mean, how does it actually work? Well, of course, there are things like spam emails coming through. Spam emails can find you more easily if you haven't got a VPN. Just to clarify what a VPN does, first of all, a VPN scatters your signal, for want of a better description. It puts your signal into a tunnel. If you haven't got a VPN, and let's say somebody in your household's using an iPad to look at a holiday in Portugal, the powers out there have monitored that from this home network, from this IP address. Somebody's looked at holidays in Portugal, which means that next time somebody else in the household logs on, they're probably hit on their own devices with adverts about Portugal. VPN on that iPad, it would scatter the signal. It would make it very hard for someone to be able to spam you back. Now, where you haven't got a particularly secure network, you're going to find you're being everyone gets spammed, but you're going to be spammed much more at the moment. And it's offering things like, would you like a coronavirus test or a coronavirus face mask? And so and these look genuine, and some purport to be from the NHS or from a genuine PPE company, and people are clicking on these links, and by clicking on these links, no matter what level of security you've got, you've introduced a bug to your system. But it goes further than that. I mentioned earlier on that maybe some staff could be using Windows 7, which is a real no-no. You may be using Windows 10, I might be using Windows 7, and I get an email, and perhaps it's about something that's a genuine business email, and in that email there's a link, and that link might be about a genuine business conference we want to attend in November. Now I forward it from my email to your email, my manager, your Windows 10, and you think, well, because it's come from Neil, it must be trustworthy. So I'm going to open it. Now, in actual fact, the link about that conference was a genuine link. But because I'm working from a Windows 7 machine, my computer's got lots of nasty bugs underneath the surface now because it's not secure anymore. And those bugs attach themselves underneath the surface of a link. So when I send you what was a legitimate link and you get it and you click on it, you're now infected. So I'd say certain basic protocols. Make sure your staff are well trained. Don't click on anything that looks suspicious. Anything that offers you cheap or free PPE is obviously suspicious. Any banks or anything else that say, please, if you're a business, please check your account details with us now to make sure everything's okay and correct in the COVID-19 lockdown, that is suspicious. And if you receive an email from a colleague, even if it's a trusted colleague, and it's got a link in it, don't click on it without being very, very certain first.
Thank you. So this one's quite a big question, but it's we can talk about a lot of things under this heading. So who is responsible for maintaining data protection when remote working, and what can we do?
Well, I think all of this, we talk about information security and data protection, don't we, in all of this? And that's kind of the thrust of this. It's about confidentiality. Now, certain areas of work, like the legal sector, they have to maintain confidentiality. They have to maintain data protection too. But if there's a problem with data protection there, they have a problem with their regulator saying, well, you've breached confidentiality potentially, and you've breached data protection rules. For most organisations that aren't regulated like that, you do have to follow data protection law. That applies to everybody. So having established that, I think it's very easy to say, everybody who's doing work, no matter what size organisation you're working for, each individual is individually responsible and can be held to account for data protection concerns. A data protection concern can come about because of a cyber concern. You click on a dodgy email, you might find somebody then is able to penetrate your computer. A threat actor or a hacker can penetrate your computer and put viruses and other things on there, or tracking information that grabs the personal data that you've got. Therefore, the personal data is compromised. Therefore, you as an individual are responsible for data protection. Overarching that is the organisation you work for. They are the data controller in data protection terms. But you have to bear in mind that you are also individually responsible. So things you can do there to try and maintain that and try and stay out of trouble. Make sure if you have a concern, make sure you report it immediately to your manager. Oops, I think I sent the wrong email out. I think I may have clicked on something I shouldn't. And don't forget, it's not just about electronic, it's about what's on your desk. Oh, sorry, I had a client folder on my desk and my husband, wife, whoever, I was on a video conference and the camera was pointing at my desk and somebody may have read it, that's a breach. That is a breach, even if it's a family member. So have a line of reporting there. If you're going to try and back yourself up as a business, what you need to do is evidence how you're managing the whole data protection concern. We've mentioned already about making sure that you keep a record of what software your staff are using. The other thing you need to do is update your Article 30 record. Now, very briefly, I'm going to go into geek mode here and say that Article 30 of the GDPR requires, and it's not an option, it requires that you know what data you've got, how it's being processed, why it's being processed, and who gets to see it, and generally how long you're going to keep it. Well, now we're all working from home, we're all processing that data differently to as we would have processed it at work. And the means we're processing are different because they're on home Wi-Fi networks, they're on home computers. So it's very important that as part of your layers of armour as a business, you do consider this and you record what devices people are using, how they're using them, and how you're maintaining the data. The other thing to bear in mind is that business-owned equipment must only ever be used for the work of the business, and it's worthwhile as well just maybe putting out a policy, a few simple lines of a policy if you haven't got a full policy for home working. Send that out to staff, the 10 commandments. Do not work in front of other people. Do not work when somebody can see you through a window. Lock away your folders every night. Make sure you log off after every use. Even if you just go to the loo for 5 minutes, log your computer off and clear temporary internet files, and don't let another member of the family or household use that device. Have those 10 commandments, maybe 20 commandments, in an email or a document, send it to your staff, get your staff to read and sign it, or email back to say I read and understood it. Because at least then it gives you some armour if anything goes wrong to say we tried. It also helps to prompt staff just to make them think about data protection. I could go on about this particular aspect all day, but it's actually such an important thing, and I think we all need to watch out for what's going to be coming in the next 3 or 4 months when the breaches and the insurers get involved, because there will be breaches of data protection and information security caused by home working.
Yep, I agree with the document. I think it's really useful to remind staff. They probably know, but I think it's really good to reinforce it, and whether firms might consider doing additional training whilst working remotely on data protection. Right. You know, that might be something that could be useful as well.
Absolutely, and sometimes those I know that firms and organisations are doing that. They're doing extra reminders, and already that has been quite helpful. I know of 1 or 2 organisations that have said we did one of these reminder sessions and we learnt a thing or two from our staff, and so now everyone's following the best practice. Definitely, the training and the best practice doesn't stop just because you're not all sat in the same office.
Okay, so I think that's the end of today's podcast, Neil, unless you have anything further to add.
I've got loads to add, but I think in the interest of keeping this punchy and sweet, we've probably I should say no more. But thank you very much, Samantha.
Thank you. So on the final slide here, just got a list of our other podcasts, which you may find interesting. So please do go and have a look at these. They'll be on the PDA Legal website, and you saw our contact details on the very first page. If you have any questions, please do contact us, and thank you for listening.